At Puteoli, the day begins before the argument has found its name. A hull has come in from the Eastern Sea, and the cargo comes off in pieces. Bronze couch fittings and marble ornaments, lampstands, crated figures, the heavy and expensive things that do not travel unless someone has already imagined the room where they will stand. The harbor is Italian, the appetite is Roman, and the workmanship crossing the water is still visibly Greek. This is not one famous wreck arriving on a named morning, for the surviving evidence will not carry that precision. It is the ordinary traffic of the late Republican import world, in which Greek things moved on Roman demand toward Roman houses. What matters on this key is not the ship's name, but the direction of desire. The evidence, in its careful modern reading, gives us ships crossing the Mediterranean laden with luxury marble and bronze, and gives us Puteoli as a great point of distribution for the world around the Bay of Naples. And it gives a warning besides, that without a bill of lading a wreck's true destination remains a guess. So the picture stays honest and stays small, Greek-looking things moving through a Roman market toward Roman houses under Roman demand. The cargo is already an argument, and it makes the argument in metal and stone. The easy phrase to reach for here is cultural revolution, and a wax tablet on the inspection table is enough to keep the phrase honest. The reading is offered as a reading, not as a mechanism proven, not culture commanding politics, nor culture merely holding the mirror up to it. The point sits closer to the dockside than to any theory. Romans kept choosing the Greek workmanship, buying it, copying it, framing it, and remained the active parties from first to last. The crate does not show Rome converted from without. It shows Roman demand selecting foreign workmanship and preparing to give it a Roman address. That distinction matters because the cargo could otherwise be mistaken for a one-way invasion of taste. The ships crossed the Mediterranean, but the chain of decision did not end at the waterline. Someone ordered the bronze, someone knew where a marble figure would stand, someone understood that a Greek form, once carried into an Italian villa or a dining room, could say something about Roman standing. The object changed its context, and the context changed the object, until a couch fitting, a statue, a lamp arm, and a pigment jar all became evidence of selection, and not of surrender. The same port shows what happened after the unloading. Consider the Egyptian blue of Vestorius, a pigment that began as an Alexandrian material and ended as a product made in Italy at Puteoli, where the name upon the jar gave the color its authority. The larger pattern moves in 3 motions: import from the Eastern Mediterranean, production in Italy, then export back out into the wider Roman world. An object does not remain foreign in the old way once Roman workshops have learned to make it, price it, and send it traveling. The blue is still Alexandrian in memory and a Roman commodity by the time it leaves the bench. Carried inland, the cargo comes to rest inside a house, and the house was already a staged building. The atrium received business and clients and the morning's visibility. The peristyle garden, further in, gathered leisure and water and sculpture. A Roman domus had no need of Greek objects to become public, for it was already a machine for reputation. What changed in the late Republic was the density and the precision of what stood inside it. The Greek statue in the garden was no decoration floating free of Roman life. It stood behind the atrium, past the threshold, where a visitor crossed over from civic obligation into cultivated leisure. Walk slowly, the house turns its social map into something a hand can touch. The atrium faces the street and the street's obligations. The peristyle turns inward, toward shade and water and conversation. A marble figure set there does not abolish the Roman house, because the house has already given the figure its employment. It marks leisure as a thing owned, arranged, and shown at exactly the right distance from the front door. Cicero's letters make the mechanism visible. He did not simply want Greek statuary, he wanted the right Greek statuary for a space that could be read as a gymnasium. The passage on his villa at Tusculum turns the request into an architectural act, a Hermathena brought over from Greece, chosen for a setting where strolling and sitting, reading and disputing could go forward in the Greek manner without making the owner 1 degree less Roman in the forum. The statue's Greekness is not thinned. It is deliberately placed, and the placing is the Roman act. The Villa of the Papyri gives the scene its fullest form, a double peristyle, Greek statuary, bronze youths and herms, and a library of Epicurean texts. Here the philosophical claim is not suffered to float away from the building, because the building itself carries it. A Roman noble could walk among Greek forms, read Greek arguments, and receive Greek friends in a space that announced its own remove from ordinary public life. If this was Hellenization, it was no dissolving bath. It was a room, with colonnades and shelves and chosen objects. The double peristyle slows the story to a useful pace. Greek culture here is not a single object set in a corner, nor a sentence of admiration in a letter. It is a whole route through a property, a walk, a view, a shelf, a bronze body, a roll of text, a shaded place where educated conversation can happen. The owner does not become Greek by walking there. He becomes a Roman host whose leisure has been furnished with Greek materials, and whose authority includes the power to decide which Greek materials belong. The same movement could be quieter and more domestic. The evidence describes ordinary Roman houses drawing in artworks and antiques and replicas through a brisk trade with the Greek world. The point is not that every owner understood every source with a scholar's care. It is that domestic space became first a receiving surface for Greek material, and then a sorting surface. A statue that did not suit a library could be turned away. A muse belonged where a bacchant did not. Taste, in this world, was a form of placement. The moralists saw the same objects and read them with alarm. The luxury debate was never truly about the objects alone, but about their use in Roman society. Sumptuary law reached mainly the dinner table, yet the anxiety ran wider, across villas and slave households, gold and silver plate, bronze statues, paintings, clothing, jewels. Roman ambivalence belongs inside this house, not in a lecture delivered outside it. The law tablet, the silver dish, the bronze figure, and the dining room door all stand in the same picture, and the unease is part of the furniture. That is why the house cannot be narrated only as a triumphant gallery of taste. The same peristyle that made cultivated leisure visible made excess visible with it. The same dining threshold that carried elegance carried suspicion. Romans did not need to reject Greek luxury in order to be anxious about it. The anxiety grew precisely from how well these things worked inside Roman competition. A bronze statue, a painted wall, a plate, and a jewel could each be read as a social instrument, and the more precisely they worked, the more sharply they could be judged. In the dining room, the change became a nightly practice. The standard triclinium set 3 couches at right angles, with places for 3 diners on each, and that geometry did real work. It turned cultural borrowing into bodily habit, where people reclined, how they reached the table, how a lamp caught the bronze edge of a couch, how one guest saw the wall painting past another guest's shoulder. The room is not a figure for Roman society. It is the place where Roman society lay down, ate, talked, ranked itself, and watched itself doing all of it. Pliny the Elder folds the bronze dining couch into the Roman story of luxury, though the gap in time must stay visible, for Pliny writes in the 70s of our era about a world already more than a century behind him. Archaeology steadies the claim. The Mardia wreck carried bronze couch material. Antikythera and Formigues C held related bed parts. The relevant wrecks belong roughly to the 80s or 70s before our era, though the coins of Antikythera have been read as carrying it rather toward the 60s. A cautious range is enough. These things were moving in the late Republic. The couch from Amitanum shows why the fuss was more than moral panic. The descriptions give coatings and inlays of silver, of copper, of glass-based enamel, with Dionysiac figures worked into the armrests and a finish that no one could mistake for ordinary furniture. It was made for the critical social moment of the Roman day, the convivium, and that word matters, because the object is not only costly, it is social. A guest registered the host's wealth by leaning upon it, and the host watched the guest recognize the workmanship under his own arm. The Greek couch did not pass into Roman practice unchanged, and the friction stays in the object itself. There was a misfit between the Greek cline and the Roman convivium. The very word triclinium was Greek-made, yet the Roman room expected 3 to a couch, a use that set the imported prestige form to unfamiliar work. Rome did not simply recline as Greece had reclined. It took a Greek prestige object, pressed it into a Roman room and then argued about the result over dinner. The misfit is the mechanism. A borrowed object becomes Roman not because its origin fades, but because the room imposes a new use upon it. 3 diners on one couch is no footnote to etiquette. It changes reach and posture, sightlines and rank. It decides who reclines nearest whom, who can speak across the table, and how the expensive furniture takes its place in a Roman evening. The borrowed form keeps its prestige. The room makes the prestige serve Roman hierarchy. The lighting repeated the movement. The bronze lamps and candelabra of the Mardia cargo belonged to dining prestige, and by the close of the 1st century before our era, the candelabrum had climbed onto the wall as well. A prestige import became a painted vertical line on a domestic surface, the room playing upon the likeness between real metal and painted metal. The story stays in the lampstand, the black wall, the flicker of oil, and an owner who wanted public magnificence scaled down to the measure of his own dinner. At the surface of the table, the revolution turned cheaper and spread wider. Aretine and Italian-style red gloss pottery was never a silver service, but it reads as active appropriation rather than passive influence. A scholar's sample of 1,675 pieces from Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Naples gives the claim a number to stand upon, and the same inquiry found the red glaze ware in virtually every sampled house. The form recalls luxury, but it does so through clay and mold, stamp and repetition. Greek-derived prestige had become a thing a far broader range of households could stack in a cupboard. Here the great men step out of the story for a while. The larger conclusion of the modern reading is that by the end of Augustus' reign the empire's new habits of buying, copying, and using these objects were already set. This is not a claim that every household turned aristocratic, and clay should not be mistaken for silver. The point is sharper. A language of refined objects had spread below the old senatorial surface, and the Roman world could now recognize itself in small luxuries that had begun as foreign appetite, become Italian production, and traveled outward again. The household shelf turns out to matter as much as the shipwreck. A wreck proves that expensive objects moved. The red glaze bowl shows what happened once the movement became repeatable. The difference between passive influence and active appropriation lives in the clay itself, in molds and stamps, red surfaces, local kilns making a prestige language available in multiples. The table did not have to be silver to carry the change. Sometimes it needed only a stack of bowls more ambitious than their material, repeated often enough that imported prestige became ordinary, one Vesuvian cupboard after another. That shelf changes the social scale of the story besides. Bronze couches and marble statues tell us what wealth could buy at the summit of the system. Red glaze pottery shows the more durable transformation because it moves the grammar of refinement into repetition. A bowl can be copied, stamped, sold, broken, replaced, and found again in house after house. It is not a single masterpiece traveling from Greece to Rome. It is a Roman-made habit, carrying a memory of luxury through clay. The discussion of dress and language opens with a late scene preserved by Suetonius, Augustus near Puteoli, distributing togas and Greek mantles, and turning the gift into a joke by having Romans dress and speak as Greeks, while Greeks took on Roman dress and Latin. It is a theatrical vignette, reaching us through the biographer's hand, and it is useful precisely because it makes language visible. Greek and Latin do not hover over the table as ideas. They are pinned to clothes and gifts, to dinner, and to a ruler amused by the exchange. Dress and language did not weigh the same on the two sides of the exchange. Toga and pallium, Latin and Greek, carried different force for Roman and for Greek self-definition, and the household texture fills the picture in. Upper-class bilingualism meant real fluency, written and spoken, in the two languages of literature and cultivation. In a Roman house, a child could learn both without the law of citizenship being rewritten by a grammar lesson. Citizenship was never a vocabulary test, and yet vocabulary mattered all the same. The Roman word to keep on the tablet is humanitas. It will not do to treat it as a plain translation of the Greek paideia, for it is a Roman formation made in answer to Greek culture rather than borrowed whole from it, and that distinction keeps the scene from sliding into a lesson about modern identity. Humanitas is not a halo about an educated man's head. It shows itself in a bilingual notebook, a tutor's hand, a library plan, and the Roman decision to give cultivated conduct a Roman name. The word shows, too, how deep the borrowing had gone without ever becoming simple imitation. A Roman aristocrat could learn Greek, read Greek, host Greek conversation, and still need a Roman word for the form of cultivated behavior he meant to claim. Humanitas therefore belongs with the furniture and the pottery. It is a worked object of another kind, Roman terminology shaped by contact with Greek education, then set inside Roman standing, Roman households, and Roman public life. The tutor at the desk belongs among these objects also. Wealthy Roman households leaned upon educated Greek nurses, slaves, and freedmen, and Greek slaves could serve as doctors and librarians, musicians, artists, and tutors. This does not soften the household, it sharpens the picture of power inside it. Greek learning often entered through unfree labor, through people whose skill was wanted while their conditions stayed bound by Roman law. The alphabet on the tablet is not innocent. It belongs to a household economy in which Greek learning could be bought, owned, and set to the teaching of Roman children. This is one of the places where a smooth story of cultural admiration would turn false. The Greek tutor in the room may be essential to elite Roman education, but essential does not mean equal. A doctor, a librarian, a musician, an artist, or a tutor could carry knowledge the household prized, while remaining inside a structure that treated the person as owned labor or dependent service. Rome's appropriation of Greek culture passed through people as well as objects, and the relation of power stays visible at the school bench. The library makes the point better than any sentence about thought could make it. At Herculaneum, the villa of the papyri held the works of Philodemus of Gadara, and Cicero sets Greek-style discussion in villa walks, in porticos, in libraries. None of this floats. It is a shelf, a roll, a room, a path around a peristyle, a bench where an owner and his guests could sit when the walking was done. The Greek text is not outside Roman life. It is stored inside a Roman property. Cicero's fussiness over the furnishing of a library keeps the story from settling into vague admiration for Greece. He objects, in the surviving record, that Bacchantes were wrong for a library, where muses were what a man required. This is Roman appropriation at its most domestic and most exacting. Not every Greek object fits every Roman purpose. The buyer wants Greece sorted by room, by activity, by self-presentation. The wrong statue is no less Greek. It is simply wrong for the Roman story the room is meant to tell. Varro's books turn language and memory into another kind of object. Cicero's praise of him survives. His writings led the Romans home when they had become like strangers in their own city. And Varro treats language and material culture as moving together, new vessels, new clothes, new furniture, and new words pushing out the old, while scholarship hurries after them to name what has gone. So the scene stays at the desk. A Roman antiquarian is not merely thinking about tradition. He is writing labels for a city whose old objects and old words no longer explain themselves. The image is almost comic in its seriousness, a scholar laboring to keep Rome legible while the cupboards and clothes, the rooms and the words change around him as he writes. But the comedy is slight, because the labor was real. If new vessels and new furniture could push aside old names, then memory itself depended on catalogues, definitions, and books. Varro is no escape from material culture into pure thought. He is the proof that material culture had changed enough to make thought archival. The resistance belongs here too. The record preserves the Senate expelling philosophers and rhetors in 161 before our era, and a censor's edict against the Latin rhetors in 92. And the larger rhythm holds philosophers driven out as corrupters of Roman youth, and returning anyway. The object in this scene is the school door and the posted order, not a free-floating complaint about influence. Rome wanted Greek argument, Greek rhetoric, Greek teachers, and Rome wanted at the same time to police the room in which young Romans learned to speak. Time belongs in this story only where it became a thing. The earliest object is plain enough, a calendar posted in the Forum in 304 before our era, setting out the lawful days of the year. Later, the habit of cutting calendars into stone or painting them on walls grows especially visible in the early imperial decades, when the surviving examples gather around Augustus and Tiberius. This was not systematization in the abstract. It was a public year that a citizen could read off a tablet, a wall, a slab of stone. The white tablet in the forum changed the texture of authority. Days that had lived inside priestly knowledge could now be pointed at, copied, disputed in open space, and the later stone and painted calendars carried that visibility further. A year was no longer only recited. It was laid out in columns and marks, its lawful and unlawful days turned into a surface any passerby could inspect. This is why time belongs among the objects. The calendar is not only a scheme in someone's head, it is a board, a wall, a slab, a public surface. Once written out, the year becomes a thing that can be seen in common, sponsored by a community, and aligned with Roman rule. The public calendar takes an authority that might otherwise stay invisible and gives it a place to stand. Caesar's reform gave the calendar a new mechanical force, the year tied to the sun and lengthened to 365 days, with a leap day every fourth. Behind the technology of the change stands the Greek astronomer Sosigenes, and a correction in 8 before our era brought the Caesarian calendar into its working form. This is Greek learning made administrative, and yet the visible carrier is still the table of dates. A calculation out of the Eastern Mediterranean had become the way a Roman public day was named. The reform gives Rome one of its cleanest acts of appropriation. Greek astronomy does not arrive as a philosophical ornament. It arrives as a correction to the working year, calculation turned into administrative rhythm. A Roman magistrate or priest, merchant or litigant or farmer, did not need to know the mathematics of Sosigenes to live inside the system the mathematics had produced. The borrowed knowledge becomes ordinary by becoming the calendar. Augustus then made time monumental. The dates hold the discipline of the claim. In 10 before our era, he brought 2 obelisks to Rome, and one became the pointer of a colossal sundial on the Campus Martius. The shaft was Egyptian, the setting wholly Roman, and the complex bound the monolith to the mausoleum and to the altar of peace. This is no small instrument in a scholar's room. It is a captured Egyptian monument turned into the pointer of a Roman public clock, with empire and the sun, death and peace, arranged across a single field. The pavement is where the calculation came back to earth. Excavation has recovered bronze lettering inlaid in marble, and the sundial demanded mathematical and astronomical work of real sophistication. The knowledge did not remain in a Greek book or an Alexandrian diagram. It was laid underfoot in Rome, in bronze letters and marble lines, so that the movement of the sun could be read as part of the order of the city. A passerby did not need to solve the mathematics to stand inside the design. The fasti complete the movement from calculation to public stone. The count of known versions of the inscribed or painted calendar from Italy stands at 48, and 44 of them belong to the years of Augustus or Tiberius. The town-by-town publishing of the calendar reads as a declaration of loyalty to the Roman system. Time had become a public surface, months and names, anniversaries, magistracies, and the emperor's presence cut into stone. Rome did not only borrow Greek astronomy. It made of the calendar a thing a citizen could walk past, sponsor, copy, and display. The numbers make the change feel less like one reform and more like a habit of display. 44 examples from the Julio-Claudian years are not a single monument dominating a city, they are a pattern spreading across Italy. A town that inscribed the Roman calendar was not merely telling its people when the courts opened. It was setting its local year inside the Roman system and making loyalty readable as stone. The marble city must be heard as rhetoric before it becomes scenery. The famous line of Suetonius, that Augustus found Rome brick and left it marble, is plainly odd if read as a literal inventory. The truer contrast is narrower, older sun-dried brick and limestone and tuff giving way in the central monumental spaces to imported and Carrara marble, to columns and veneers, temple fronts and porticos, until by the end of the reign the forum could be described as a forest of gleaming white columns. That is a claim about surfaces, not about the constitution. Vitruvius supplies the grammar beneath part of that surface. He can be read using Greek-derived proportion to strengthen Roman practice, reconciling Greek theory with Italian custom without surrendering Roman identity in the bargain. The scene stays at the architect's desk, compass and rule, column and plan, and a problem to be solved. Greek theory is not a foreign master ordering Rome about. It is a set of proportions bent to serve Roman building, Roman ceremony, and Roman claims about ancestral practice. The altar of peace belongs here as a carved surface, not as another entry in Augustus' career. Its building falls between 13 and 9 before our era, and it is striking how completely it refuses triumphal imagery. Its language is processional and priestly, fertile and familial, veiled sacrifice, children, animals, the long vegetal scroll, prosperity made visible, and its carvers drew upon sources in Periclean Athens and Hellenistic Pergamum. It is a Roman piece, altar speaking a Greek and Hellenistic visual grammar, and declining the easier picture of piled enemy armor. The Forum of Augustus is another arranged room, only larger and public. The great Romans of the past stand in respectful files along the porticos. The temple and the ancestral figures close the vista. The high rear wall seals the space like the backdrop of a theater. That wall does real work. It makes the Forum not a collection of statues, but a governed field of looking, where a visitor enters a marble order and finds past and legend, gods and dynasty, set in relation to one another with almost domestic precision. The comparison with a house is not casual. Earlier, the villa sorted Greek statuary by room and purpose. Here, the Forum sorts Roman memory by portico and niche, wall and vista. The city becomes a public interior. Marble does not simply make the past grander. It arranges the past so that a visitor's movement through the space becomes a lesson in ancestry, divine favor, and the Augustan order. Augustus' offices and settlements and succession matter here only through the marble order they left behind. Older materials remain across the city, while the central monuments offer a denser white grammar of columns and walls, niches and processional ways. The politics are present, but present first as sightlines and surfaces before ever they become argument. The copying could be literal. The caryatids are the most exact evidence of all. Casts of the maidens of the Erechthion were taken and carried back to serve as prototypes for Roman versions, set into the Forum of Augustus and into Agrippa's Pantheon. An Augustan building reached, by design, for a unified style able to stand beside the Greek cities of the East. Rome did not hide the borrowing. It scaled it, polished it, set it into a new program, and made Athens stand in a Roman colonnade. This is imitation with paperwork and masonry attached. A plaster cast is not vague influence. It is a physical method of copying by which the Athenian form is measured, transporting, and remade for a Roman setting. That makes the act more revealing than any general resemblance could be. Rome had no need to make the borrowed form look accidental. Its authority came in part from showing that the best Greek models could be made to serve Roman space. The visual order was never a serene reconciliation of everything foreign. The ambivalence stays in view. Isis and Serapis could be present, attractive, and politically awkward all at once, and Augustus banned the Egyptian rites within the city in 28 before our era, a ban renewed by Agrippa in 21. The same Rome that raised an Egyptian obelisk as a public clock could shut the door on Egyptian ritual space. That contradiction is part of the story, for Roman appropriation was never the same thing as open surrender to every imported form. The last object is Agrippa's Pantheon, and it asks to be seen by first setting aside the building every modern visitor pictures. The Agrippan Pantheon belongs to 27 before our era, its completion placed by 25 in the tradition Dio preserves, and the Agrippan structure was unlikely to have carried a dome. The line must be drawn plainly. The great domed pantheon that still stands is Hadrian's, not Agrippa's design or material. What remains is enough: a portico, sculpture on the facade, caryatids by the Athenian Diogenes, a dedication to all the gods, and statues so arranged that Augustus and Agrippa stand at the threshold, and not inside among the divinities. The correction is no pedantic detour, it protects the whole argument. If the later dome is smuggled backward into Agrippa's building, the close of this episode becomes a modern postcard rather than an Augustan object. The safer evidence is the more interesting in any case. Greek caryatid forms, an Athenian sculptor, a Roman portico, and a dedication broad enough to gather the gods while keeping Augustus and Agrippa outside the divine interior. The building becomes one more threshold, where borrowed form and Roman placement meet. Set the objects together one last time. A crate at Puteoli, a garden herm, a couch's silvered arm, a red glaze bowl, a Greek tutor's wax tablet, a library roll, a calendar slab, an Egyptian obelisk, a relief of the peace altar, a copied caryatid, and not one of them says that Rome became Greek. The harder and more useful reading is this: the exchange was renewable, active, and Roman at the point of framing. Rome learned to speak in borrowed forms while keeping for itself the decisions that mattered, where the form would stand, who might use it, and what Roman name would be carved beneath it.